Next thing we're going to do with the hyper poem, and I promise we're almost done, I'm going to add a couple of hyperlinks that will help us navigate inside of the page. I'm going to slide all the way back up. I have the index.html open. That's my main poem. I'm going to see what I got. I got the road not taken, which is inside an H1 at the very top. It's part of the page header. I have my byline, which is an H1. Then I have the rest of my body. At the very bottom, I have also read, fire, and ice, which already we know is going to lead to another page. However, after this, I'm going to add a link back to an anchor inside the page. Now, I'm sure that if you took Web Design 1 here at El Centro, that you know that it's very popular to add at the very bottom of the page, return to top of page. I'll just say return to top. And although this is something that maybe was more popular in days gone by, right now, I mean, we have incredible speed in our broadband. We can go back to the top with no problem by just scrolling. There's no really a big need to do this. However, just so that you know how to link directly to another item in the page, let's go through this exercise. I'm going to see where I can go to the top. Like I said earlier, I already have an ID up here that's called page header. Page header is delineated here as a hashtag page header. If I go to the bottom and I highlight the text that I just typed in, return to top, I can just do that, highlight, and then for my link I can say, hey, go back to hashtag page header. I always use the same ID, so it's page, capital H, header. To test this, I'm going to put the file onto the server, say yes to everything, and then go back and reload my home page. Let me move this around a little bit, and I'll go to week 5. Here's my week 5. At the very bottom, I see now that I have my return to top. It also takes in the white hover change, just as the rest of the links. I'll click on that. That takes me to the road not taken. Now this was done with an ID that already existed, mainly the page header. But if something was not there, for example, let's say that I wanted to go back and just see the author's name again in the byline, I'm going to highlight by Robert Frost. Although this has some CSS styling, it doesn't have an ID. I see that ID is currently none. I'm going to change that by selecting the none word and telling it to add an ID and call it author. I'll press enter to accept, and now I see that my tag selector tells me, hey, you have an H1 and it's got a tag of ID equals author. At the very bottom, after return to top, I'm going to add another line and say, no, I don't know, return to author, where, if I can spell correctly, return to byline. Makes a little bit more sense. Not really, but for all intents and purposes, it makes total sense. I'll highlight return to byline. I'm going to say in the link, why don't you go back to the link that I just selected or created rather, that's hashtag author. Press enter to accept that. I'll use the file management to put my file, say yes to all and yes again. I'll go back to my home page and reload the page, and I see that I still have all my poem. At the bottom I have return to top, which will take me back to the very top of the page. And if I slide back and say return to byline and click on that, it takes me directly to by Robert Frost. Now, like I said, what are the uses for this? That's going to be up to you. Your mileage may vary. It may be that you have a very long page that you would like to navigate this way. So you never know, it might come in handy someday. I'm going to go back to Dreamweaver, and the last thing we're going to do in this page, we're going to add a quick photo. I would like to have maybe a smaller image of that yellow wood that we saw before. Let me go real quick back to the page, open up the yellow wood and see this image that we associated with this poem, The Road Not Taken. You'll notice this is a very large image. However, we can manipulate it inside of Dreamweaver so that it becomes part of the poem. and it's not so obtrusive as it is in this particular web page. This is a very large file as far as web images are concerned. I'll go back to Dreamweaver and see where I can put it. I guess I'm going to put it here on the right side at the top, at the very top of the poem. I'm going to first of all, I'm going to click on that just before the letter T in 2, and before I do anything, I do need to download this big file, since now I've decided that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to right click on that and tell it to save my image. I'm going to guide my navigator here to go all the way to week 5. Inside of week 5, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it images. I'll open up that folder, and it's already got a name. It's called Road Not Taken. I don't know if I'll use any more images in this page anytime soon, but as a matter of practice, I just like to call my images a simple name, just usually one word followed by a number. For this, I'm going to call this not song, but rather poem 01. If I were to have a second image, it would be called poem 02. Whatever works for you, as long as you feel comfortable finding your images and doing your work, name them whatever you want. I'll go back to my Dreamweaver again. I'll wait a little bit, or if I actually run out of steam here, I'm going to refresh my page. And now, so that I can bring in the image, I'm going to go to the insert menu, insert, and tell it to insert an image. Here's my poem 1 inside of week 5 images. I'll click on poem. I'll click OK to accept that, and I'll slide down a little bit, and you can tell that yes, this is the image we got from the internet. It's huge, it's big, it's bigger than the page itself. I can't see all of it here, so I'll slide back to the top, make sure I'm on the left side, and see what's happening here. I put it just before the T in 2, and now it's above everything. I'm going to click on the image and make sure it's selected. You'll see that in the properties it gives you a little thumbnail of what's going on. It's telling you that this is images/poem01 JPEG, and currently it's at 1600 pixels wide by 805 pixels tall. Like I said, a large image. I can tell it then here now to make it a little bit smaller. I can do that by changing the size of the width from 1600. Let's start by doing 800, so just cutting it in half and pressing enter. By doing that, it is now a lot smaller. It still doesn't fit very well in the page. The text is still too much for it to handle. And however, notice that as I made the change, that these numerals 800 and then the height at 403 got bold. That means that some changes were made. It's kind of like when we see the little asterisks on the styles.css and the source code. It's just telling us you have changed this, and so be mindful of what's going on. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. Why don't I go for half of that at 400 pixels? And now it's a little bit more acceptable size. I can see that if I were to slide this to the right, that then the two roads diverged and the yellow wood text would actually fit okay. And I can do that, that is slide it to the right, by right clicking on my image and telling it to align to the right. So now the image appears to the right. I have my entire text on the left, all the way from the top to the bottom. So I'm feeling fairly comfortable with this page. I think that this image could actually be a little bit higher, or rather wider, when I change it to 500 and press return and see what happens. And it's getting to the point where I probably have to make up my mind and say, yes, this is probably the size that I want. These two numbers are still bold. That means that they're still in transition. They still have not been set as the final destination for the width and height. That will not happen until we click on this check mark. If I highlight, or rather hover on top of the check mark, it tells me this is where you commit the image size. I will click on that one, and the action you're about to perform will permanently alter the selected image. You can undo any changes you make by selecting edit undo. And what that means is that you can still change your mind if you go back, Control Z, edit undo to go back a couple of steps. However, this will only be good for as long as you have not saved and closed this file. Once you save and close it, that's it. The changes are made. You have committed. The check mark is gone. Your final size is not even what I actually wanted, 500. It tells me it's 496 by 250, and that's fine. So I'm going to go to File and Save and see what happens. It saved it, and now let's see what happens when I upload it. I will click on my file management, tell it to put the file. Very important, now you have multiple files that are dependent. One of them is the CSS style sheet, and now you have this image file. So when you click on yes to say that yes, dependent files should be included, that means it's going to try to upload the CSS plus the image files that you have added to your page. So those pages are gone up. I'm going to go back to my browser. I can close the origin of that story. I need to reload my page, and now I see my image. It's come in. It's at the size that I asked it to be, and it's to the right of my poem. If you want to add any more images, you can do so in using the same process. You can just slide them to the right and make sure that they are on top of the paragraph that you want to use. You can always click on Return to Byline, and if I had any more time or the inclination, I could just put in a link to say, hey, go back to the picture and show it to me again. So that's the end of the hyperpoem.